This is Andrew, and this is Keen On, the daily now.tv chat show with some of the world's leading thinkers and writers. Hello, everybody. It is Sunday, August the 6th, 2023. He is known as one of the world's 10 most influential intellectuals, at least according to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He is the author of many books, an astonishing number of books, embarrassing from my point of view with my 4 or 5 books. He's also prolific in film and television. He's quite a guy, and he's been on Keen On many times. First, when it was on TechCrunch, Douglas Rushkoff was on in 2013 talking about his book Present Shock. Then he was on back in 2015, still on TechCrunch. And now as a LitHub show, he's been on back in 2019 talking about democracy and technology. He was on in 2021 talking about technology and capitalism. And he was on recently, earlier this year, talking about the escape fantasies of tech billionaires, which was all about his new book, a big hit, as always with his book, Survival of the Richest, Escape Fantasies of the Tech Billionaires. And he's joining us once again. It's always an honor to have Douglas Rushkoff on the show. Doug, can we join the dots here back from 2013 for the last 10 years? You've been one of my frequent guests in terms of joining the dots of establishing a narrative. You've always done a very good job. How would you join those dots in the history of technology between 2013 and 2023?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, in 2013, I just wrote the book Present Shock. And what I was arguing there was that, the future is now, and that digital technology had really changed the way we relate to narrative itself. In there, I kind of broke down what digital technology as an environment does to us, and how we had moved from an analog environment of stories with beginnings, middles, and ends, and some sense of continuity. So some understanding of life as you set a goal, and then you work towards that goal, and then get that goal, and that digital technology, because it wasn't analog, it was pulsed. It was, you're not watching a second hand go around the clock. You're just, 207, 208, 209. It was just this pulsed way of moving through the world, that it had kind of collapsed our understanding of narrative and put us in a kind of a confused state where we were going to try to connect dots rather than make real sense. And we would connect things that maybe weren't going to be connected. So I was concerned at the time that the people that were in what was called the Tea Party movement, which was a very kind of impatient right-wing movement, that they were going to move increasingly into conspiracy theory, because they were so desperate for a story that they would rather there be someone bad running things than that this is just a stuff happens reality. So I explained how they were doing something I called fractal noia, where they're trying to connect things in a paranoid way, and how that would lead to apocalypto. And I guess what happened was that over the next 10 years, technologists and tech industry, investors and all doubled down on what they were doing, which was, what I wrote about in the last book, which is just earn enough money to insulate themselves from the reality they were creating by earning money and using technology in that way. So they would build stuff, but make sure their kids went to Rudolf Steiner schools and lived on, organic goat farms to avoid all that stuff, where the rest of us were swimming in this, all the stuff that everyone's eventually written about. So I think we became untethered. I think we're very confused. We're in a state of almost I don't even know what to call it, pre-traumatic stress disorder, where we're anxious and depressed and looking to make sense, and looking in all the wrong places for it. But I think we may have finally gotten to that place now where people are willing to say, oh, I get it. This isn't working for me anymore. So you see tons of people are turning to, the psychedelics and mushrooms, or back to nature, or permaculture, and, local businesses, worker-owned cooperatives. So I think people are realizing that they've got to get their feet back on the ground, that these digital spaces, while extremely powerful, they're not conducive to good sense making, to good decision making, to good relationships. That we've got to look at these things more like we look at antibiotics or other strong medicines. These are powerful technologies, but they're not where you really want to spend the majority of your time.
Maybe the title of your next book, there's always another Rushkoff book, will be The Untethering of America. Looking at these 10 years, back in 2013, Doug, of course, Facebook was at its height, Twitter was in its pomp. We just had the beginnings, I think, of TikTok. We had Instagram dominant. How central is the history of social media to this untethering of America? Or the untethering of the world, not just America?
I don't like to overblame social media. I blamed social media a lot in an almost media deterministic way for a number of years. And I remember writing around 2011 why I'm leaving Facebook, because what they do and their practices, a lot of the bad stuff they were doing even then. And then it's funny, when the Social Dilemma movie came out on Netflix, something just switched in me where I felt like, oh, look how they're making human beings sound so easily manipulated. That, oh, here are these master technology engineers, and at Facebook and Snapchat using behavioral finance to develop algorithms that section people off and manipulate them and get them to join riots and do crazy things against their better interests. And I don't know, it started to make me feel like it was a picture of humanity as just so in a passive Pavlovian state, ready to be manipulated. Right? Facebook shows them the color red, and oh no, there they go. It was a little bit kind of devil made me do it stuff that reminded me of the documentaries in the 70s and 80s about, oh, does violence on television lead to violent children? And I kind of almost reached that peak where I look at social media more as a symptom than as the cause. That, yeah, it's a fractious environment, and it does tend toward the sensational and conflict and people barking at each other. But it's a symptom of, dare we say, it's a symptom of capitalism. It's a symptom of an economic system that's trying to extract value from people by any means necessary. So, if that's our model, and if that's what we agree are the ground rules of this game we call, American life, then of course you're going to get that. But I'm looking at the problem as kind of earlier or further upstream than just these technologies.
Doug, you mentioned the Social Dilemma. The movie came out in 2020, but you talked about leaving Facebook in 2011. So you were an early refusenik on social media. What happened in 2011 for you?
It was around the time, it wasn't, there's a few things. First, over the whole, from really 2000 on, I realized my experiences of the internet were not positive. In the early 90s and mid 90s, I would go online and do email and go on the Well. It was a bulletin board of conversations. And when I would sign off, I would feel invigorated. My mind had been open. I met new people. I had a discussion with a kid in Japan about, Evangelion. And
was that social? Going back to the Well, you were an early, and that was the ideal community. Was that a social media platform, do you think?
Yeah. the whole internet. I mean, this is what I wrote. I mean, some people credit me with inventing the term social media, in fact, because it was in the mid 90s. Then I said, oh no, the internet is a social medium, and it keeps fighting off infections, whether it's the infection of government and military or the infection of corporatism. At the end of the dot-com boom, I was like, yay, year 2000, the dot-com crash. And I realized people lost money, but I felt like, oh, the social internet can return. The social medium has reasserted itself. So yeah, these were all social. Email was social. Usenet and IRC were all social channels. It's the things like Facebook, to my mind, were less social, but they were more self-branding sites. The difference on you might have one line of profile of who you are, but who you are is what you do, is what you're sharing, what you're saying. On sites like Facebook and MySpace, the idea was to create home pages that represented who you are, except instead of actually making a homepage about dogs or kites or storm chasing or whatever it is that you do in whatever style you do it, you followed the cookie cutter instructions. And who you were was, what movies do you like? What movie stars? What songs do you listen to? So you really created a consumer profile of yourself and put that as who you are. That was the mirror that you used to sort of to decide who you are and represent yourself to the world. So there was much less actual activity between people and much more assertion of, this is me and that's me and this is me. So the conversations that resulted from that were always about some assertion of self or a self-presentation, as opposed to actual engagement and touching antennas with other people to find stuff out. You still see that, you tweet on Twitter, and especially if you're in a kind of a political group or an ideological group, and it's not to connect to others, it's for others to acknowledge and confirm, yes, what you said, I'm going to like it, I'm going to comment on it, I'm going to, and that's not.
It's almost a digital Cartesianism. It's a way of proving that you exist.
Right. And I get it, because it's hard to know you exist, particularly if, well, in COVID, it was really hard. If you don't have other people, if you don't have social relationships, if all you really have is your consumption, it's your Netflix and your Walmart and your Costco, wherever you go. Yeah, it's really hard, because human beings, their identities are expressed through community and relationships. That's why I wrote, before this last book, I wrote a book called Team Human, arguing that being human is a team sport. And that while these technologies may have been invented in the 90s to help people connect and function more like the team that we are, that's that red one up there, we use them for the opposite. We use them instead to isolate, the main effect of, it's what the social dilemma was trying to show. It doesn't bring people together. It isolates you. It's creating these, basically Skinner boxes of psychological control. I don't think they work as well as what social dilemma is arguing, but I do think they erode. Their main feature is to erode our more organic social mechanisms. It makes it the world that we live in is one where, the actual next book I was thinking to write was Borrow a Drill. It's really hard for people today. If you need to put a hole in the wall, and you live in America, chances are you're going to go to the Home Depot and buy a minimum viable product drill for $39. Is some little rechargeable piece of crap that they sent a kid in the Congo into a mine to get the cobalt or the rare earth metals and manufacture this thing in China using something certainly close to slave labor and ship it over here. You use a drill maybe twice, stick it in the garage, and the next time you pull it out, it's not even going to work, and you throw it out and it gets shipped over to Brazil into some waste heap where some other children are mining it for more renewable energy, when you could have just gone over to your neighbor's house, gone to Bob's house and said, can I borrow a drill? And we're so reluctant to do that, because if you ask Bob for the drill, chances are Bob's going to want to come over and drill the hole for you. He's actually going to be, because he wants to make sure you get a stud. And if Bob comes over and drills the hole for you to hang up your picture, Now, what do you owe Bob? Now if you have a barbecue the next weekend and Bob lives down the block and he smells the barbecue, so you kind of have to invite Bob over to the barbecue. Now, if you invite Bob over to the barbecue, well, other people on their block are going to be like, wait a minute, Doug's having a barbecue, he invited Bob. You might have to invite everyone on the block. And then what? Then you've got this block party, right? And all these people become your friends. That's the fear, right? We're not loath to lend stuff to other people. We're afraid to borrow something, to take from someone else.
Some people might see it as a fear. Some people might see it as an opportunity, a promise of making friends with your neighbors.
Of course but very, very few of us do, right? And I don't blame social media for that. Social media is a symptom of that. It's a safe, titrated way for people to interact with each other, or that feels like one, compared to actually meeting the other people in the real world. But the real world, this is where human beings have the home field advantage against all these nefarious players. It's where what Elon Musk says doesn't matter if you own your town with your community. That these everything on there, on the TV and on the net matters less when you have a knit community fabric that you're a part of. And you shouldn't feel guilty for doing that either, because the more that your community takes care of itself, then the less of a burden you are on the whole system, the less brittle our supply chains are when you're sourcing your food locally. I mean, it has a set of corresponding second order effects that actually reduce the power at the top.
Yeah, in a way, it comes back to Jaron Lanier's old book, Who Owns the Future? We Certainly Don't. Let's go back to 2011, Doug. Real history, not just digital history.
Yeah.
You've always been a very political writer, engaged politically, political activist. To what extent do you see that period as being the aftermath of the Occupy movement and the Arab Spring? How influential do you think the failures of those movements, maybe Occupy didn't fail, certainly the Arab Spring did, and the promise of social media that was articulated by a lot of so-called Silicon Valley futurists and optimists in 2009, 2010, how did that shape not just the world, but your own thinking about all this?
Well, it's interesting. I was really hopeful about Occupy. Largely because, it was funny, and I was writing about what ended up being, Occupy in Present Shock as well. I was interested in Occupy as a response to Present Shock, right? So if you're stuck in the moment, right? If you no longer have these narratives, if you no longer have, Martin Luther King with the eye on the prize, and we're going to march together towards that goal, and perhaps an ends justifies the means journey to liberation. If you're in the moment, then what do you do? And Occupy seemed to be an answer to that. That what you do is, rather than struggling towards something, you create a new normative state in the present. You actually do the thing. And when I wrote about Occupy then, I was trying to say, that the reason why CNN and everyone were having such a hard time with Occupy is because Occupy wouldn't state their goals. What do you want? They would it was like a new normative behavior. They just did it. We're going to occupy, I called it Occupy reality, that we're actually going to occupy this space and live in this present together. And it was powerful. It was really, Occupy in that way was coming to the call that Obama set up when he said, we are the change we've been waiting for. It is now. He didn't live true to that, right? He went straight to Goldman and tried to figure out some policies to help keep things going. But the people who believed what he was talking about were the people who actually did Occupy. And Occupy also, it was the original moment of Bitcoin and crypto, where we saw crypto was the answer. Crypto was almost like tech support for the Occupy movement. If we don't want to be part of Wall Street's money system, where you're borrowing these financialized instruments that extract value from them in order for you to even use them, that's what money is. Money is the growth mandate of our economy, is programmed into interest-bearing currency. The idea was, if we had crypto or some way of using these technologies to verify transactions with each other, then we don't need that. We can have like time dollars or a let system or some trading thing where now we're verified. We can trade with people we don't know. And of course, what happened? It became capitalism is really good at this. Speculators are good. They said, "Oh no, this is actually a new asset class. Let's use this to bet. Let's use this to speculate." So the crypto story kind of got away from us. But yeah, there was this moment in 2011 when there was a real resurgence of the original cypherpunk
And
moment.
how you mentioned cyber, how central do you think social media was in the Occupy movement itself? I mean, people like Clay Shirky suggested it was an important piece, although I think he may have a different opinion now.
Yeah, it was a tool. That my favorite thing on I don't know if you call it social media or not. My favorite internet-y part of Occupy was there was a website that you could go to that had streaming media from each of the Occupy encampments, from everyone that they could get to participate. So you'd go and there's like 60 different places and you could see a camera of what's going on at that Occupy encampment at that moment. And I did a conference that coincidentally was through the first weeks of Occupy. I was doing a conference in New York about taking back the net. It was called Contact. And the idea was 2011. The idea was we would kind of fold the weird fringes of the net back into the center, that it was time. And I raised some money from Pepsi to give awards. So we gave these $10,000 awards to projects. And one of them was to the Freedom Tower, which was this, basically, it was a way of bringing a Wi-Fi to an Occupy encampment. It was at the time it was more complicated to do than it is now. But it was basically a Wi-Fi tether for a group of 1,000 people in a particular location. So there was a social component to it, but I would argue the power of Occupy is that it was embodied, that people brought their bodies to a place and co-located and kind of reclaimed public space in the way that the original rave movement, which people think was just kids getting high and doing electronic music dancing, but it wasn't. It was actually the reclamation of public spaces and map points. And okay, they're going to have this party in this place. So it was more that we don't need a nightclub, we don't need admission prices, we don't need that in order to have fun together. It was a decommodified entertainment space, and Occupy was kind of that.
Do you think that? I mean, there are lots of frauds of social media, but the biggest fraud, the biggest trick, was Zuckerberg and others, maybe even the Twitter people, presenting social media as public space when in fact it was private. We've had Talia Stroud on the show from University of Texas. She works with Eli Parisa on the ideal of digital public space. Is that the biggest tragedy in social media and the internet in the period that you and I have been talking over the last 10 years, this privatization of digital space in the language of the public, or which of course is the reverse?
Yeah, I mean, the internet, as I experienced it, even before I knew what this word was, the internet was a commons. The way the internet worked, for the way the computers worked, for those of us who were around in the 70s and 80s in the early days, there was one processor somewhere, and everyone who had a terminal was sharing cycles of the processor. So if you wanted to run a program, you had to find time, you would borrow time on the processor to run your program. So the ethos of the internet as these networks develop were about how do we share these resources most efficiently with each other. The network itself was understood as a shared resource. That's why things were free. That's why when you made a program, usually it was a program to help people share resources or share information. So all these programs, the email program was Eudora, or Mosaic, or it was the web browser. These were all shareware. They were all free programs because they were developed in schools as part of building out this commons together. And you're right. Once it became privatized, once those first ads came up, and it was like this is a for-profit endeavor, everything changed. Then the object of the game was, how do we use these technologies to extract money from living humans, rather than how do we all use these technologies together? And you talk about the commons, and people still quote these asinine, ridiculous ideas like the tragedy of the commons, which was written by a eugenicist white supremacist, right? And an admitted one.
Who's that? Who's that?
The guy who came up with Tragedy of the Commons.
I thought it was a woman.
No, ultimately, no. That was. There's that too, but no, she has another tragedy. Tragedy of the Commons. Eugenics movement, and you'll see Hardin, Garrett Hardin was the guy, a racist, eugenicist, nativist, and Islamophobe,
who came up with the Tragedy of the Commons.
Yeah, that was the essay. He wrote this essay in Science. That he basically, and I get it, if you see all humans as selfish herders, right? If you buy the libertarian ideal that this is a competition between individuals for the survival of the fittest individual, then of course you're going to move into that. Well, the commons is a ridiculous idea. The commons is not. The commons is just we're going to guard a resource together and enforce a set of rules about it. So like there's a lake and it only has so much fish. Okay, we're going to guard this thing, and you're only allowed to get this many fish from the lake in a given year. So everyone who comes and fishes is going to have an ID card, and we're going to punch a hole in the ID card every time you leave to count how many fish you have. And when you've used up all the fish, that's all the fish you're allowed to have. Or grazing grass. You can bring your cows here to graze, but only so many cows over so much time, because everyone's got to get their cows fed. And if you have more cows you can't have more cows than can be fed on our common patch of soil. And the enclosure of the commons was just that. It was the privatization of public lands by private chartered monopolies in the late Middle Ages. It's the period I always write about. And we really did that to the internet. The internet was a commons that we enclosed. And we created these, usually through fear. The things like AOL and Facebook and these networks, they were for people who were afraid. They were told, oh, no, the internet is a wild, wild west. It's scary out there. Hackers are going to get you, and people are going to show you porn, or something bad's going to happen to you. So come into our private thing, pay us money, and we'll keep you safe from them, right? But it turned out not to be safe at all. These are the ones that sold us to Cambridge Analytica and used the at least the best that they had.
You mentioned Cambridge Analytica, Doug. I want to move forward a little bit. Were there moments between 2013 and 2023 where you just sat back and thought, wow, I didn't expect anything as outrageous as this? Was the 2016 election, for example, I did a show yesterday with, I'm sure you know him, Tobias Rose Stockwell. He has a new book out on the internet as an outrage machine. Right. He believes 2016 is when he woke up specifically. You mentioned Cambridge Analytica. Was there a moment in between 2013 and 2023 when you suddenly thought to yourself, oh my God, this is even worse than me at my most pessimistic, my most dystopian imagine?
Yeah. Well, what's weird, I mean, I had a few moments. I mean, my original moment was when Wired magazine came out in 1993 and said, this is a business opportunity. You know, we're going to have a long boom, that the internet is here to save capitalism. I was like, uh-oh, that's a different story. So there was that moment. There was the moment that Netscape went public, you know, when they sold that as a public company, and it was like, wow. And that was the same day that Jerry Garcia died. And I always took that as a strange sign that the 60s values of the net were now going to be left behind for these corporate values. And then the dot-com crash, and it was really the AOL Time Warner merger in 99.
That was an incredible moment. What was that,
99.
99,
And that was
yeah.
when, and I got asked to write the op-ed for the New York Times on what that meant. And I said, oh, it means that Steve Case is cashing in his chips and the dot-com boom is about to become a dot-com bust. And they said, we can't publish that. Everyone in the business section says you're insane. You know, of course, 3 months later, it turned out to be exactly what it meant. But in the time that you're talking about, you know, in the 2013 to like 2017, I mean, honestly, the fact that Trump got elected was pretty shocking to me. That to me felt like we had gotten discombobulated, you know, and it was for a variety of reasons. I mean, I would argue, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. I don't want to be.
You can say whatever you like on my show.
Oh, right. On this show. Yeah, I think you're allowed to say it. I would argue that what happened there, the real story of what happened there, was the Hillary Clinton campaign was resisting the positive side of the internet, which was the Bernie Sanders campaign. You know, the Bernie Sanders campaign organized in a different way, in a sort of a bottom-up way that would have produced a majority in the party if the Democrats hadn't said, oh no, we have a way to prevent an insurgency from within, and that's we have superdelegates. We don't have to listen to the majority of Democrats, and when we do our primaries, we can pick, you know, which is what they decided to do. And I feel like they resisted the very best version of Clay Shirky's "Here Comes Everybody." You know, and I didn't like "Here Comes Everybody." I was kind of mad at Clay about that, because "Here Comes Everybody" meant everybody thinks they can write, everybody thinks they can do this. You know, there was no more expertise. There was no more disciplines. There were no more academics. It's like, oh no, it's this populist madness. But the Bernie campaign had a "Here Comes Everybody" quality that I think frightened powerful elites on the left. And they didn't let it happen. And that's what I feel that was as responsible for Trump as anything else. Everybody saw how the Hillary Clinton campaign operated. You know, the only emails that you ever got from the Hillary Clinton campaign, that I did anyway, were invitations to events that I couldn't afford to go to. You know, oh, you pay $1,000 and you could meet Chelsea. You know, I'm like, what? How is this my people's workers party? You know, what happened here?
Yeah, I wouldn't have. If you paid me $1,000, I wouldn't have wanted to meet Chelsea. What about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, though? When it became clear that social media companies or tech companies like Facebook were bound up in a way that's still not entirely clear in the election, what did you make of that? Did that just confirm your worst fears, or were you surprised?
It confirmed a fear that this has nothing to do with the tech and everything to do with the business plan. You know, when I remember people were always scared about hackers and hackers hacking into systems and all that. And I know that's a real fear, and we need cybersecurity. It's really difficult. But the Cambridge Analytica hack was not a technology hack, but a business model hack. They hacked Facebook's business model, right? And the business model of the net. And that was what I was like, this still goes back to capitalism and the way that business works and the way these companies need to grow. That sort of the move fast and break things ethos is really one of how do we get hockey stick growth and maintain it? So I started to see the internet less as these powerful technologies and more as these kind of bars and restaurants that were in hock to the mob. That once you sell your restaurant to the mob, then the restaurant itself is no longer about the food, right? You're just running money through it. And that's what I started to realize. These social networks were just the names on debt, and how does money run through them, and the business model of the way the API of Facebook work was really just that, was something that Cambridge could come and say, oh, we can use their model this way.
Doug, I promised you we wouldn't have a Joe Rogan style 90-minute interview. So let's move to the end. Before we went live, you were suggesting to me that you thought there was some new energy. Once again, history repeating itself. What do you make of the Web3 term and the attempt in a post Twitter, Facebook world to reinvent social media with platforms like Blue Sky, Mastodon? Is there anything there, or is it just more of the same?
I mean, there's anything there. I mean, I think Web3 came too soon in social history after Web 2 for people not to see what it is, right? There's Web 1, people are doing business, and then when all those people are competing, against each other, they invent Web 2, and that's what Tim O'Reilly and someone else called it. Web 2 was a way to sort of level up. So you're not going to compete down here with all these people. Web 2 is you're going to aggregate all the Web 1s. And when Mark Zuckerberg realizes that Facebook's reached the peak of its hockey stick, he can't grow anymore, he goes, oh, I'm going to leave Web 2 and do Web 3, right? And he takes a bunch of terms like crypto and virtual reality and, throw them all together, and that's going to be this new thing, the Web 3 thing, that's going to then sort of aggregate and level up from there. It's what Peter Thiel wrote about in his book, From 0 to 1. The idea is you want to be one order of magnitude above where everybody else is competing. So you name the next thing, you level up, and you're there. And I feel like we just did Web 2, and we look at Web 3 and we go, oh, there's a bunch of buzzword, AI, crypto, VR, Web 3, that's going to be bigger than Web 2, so we got to get there. And I think when in that switch, I think there's a moment of opportunity for people to go, I'm not getting on that ride. I'm just not going on that ride. There are always false promises. It never works out. We're not driving around in autonomous vehicles. It's another way of trying to raise money for a boondoggle, moonshot, X Prize nonsense. And the only thing that makes the only thing that makes me happy is being in real place with other people, touching people, laughing with people, being with people, walking down and getting a coffee. It's like, it's the happiness of life is so simple that to generate the necessary time, energy, and money to participate on that, get the right goggles and the right crypto and I don't care. And it's not just that I'm old. It's that it's exhausting and unnecessary and not even fun. So I feel like I'm hopeful that people are seeing the other way. It's like I'm glad we live in a world with Lexapro and Prozac and Wellbutrin and all these things to help people cope with the depressing, depleting nature of end-stage corporate capitalism, amplified by digital technology. But have you tried mushrooms instead? Right? It's almost the opposite strategy. Instead of insulating myself from the social and psychological harm and having a way to still maintain my utility value to go on in that way, mushrooms and some of these alternative ways of dealing with stress kind of open the window of possibility, open your window of confrontation so that you can see, oh, wait a minute, I'm part of a bigger system here. And it's like you can heal your stomach in two ways, right? You can take the pill to make the pain go away, or you can start addressing your gut biome, right? And start dealing with all the bacteria, start seeing the system in there. And I feel like more and more people are willing to pull back and look systemically at what's going on. Where is our faith? Where are our social relationships? How are we relating to the ground beneath our feet? Where is our food coming from? Where is our air coming from? And willing to entertain permaculture and biodynamics and social relationships and the phases of the moon and the actual social contact that we need. And I feel like that this Web3 moment is an opportunity for people to say, oh, do I want to prepare for more and more virtual reality, or do I want to, let people go play there? But I want to take this opportunity to engage in reality. And the people I know are more into that. I'm starting to do theater again, local theater. What is that? That's encouraging.